It's,
Hey, there she
you
is.
know, this new phone, this 13, it it's not working.
It's all good. As I said before you logged on, Mercury is in retrograde, so I was expecting some havoc when it came down to tech, and so it's all good. We made it. We're here. Hi.
Well, thank you to my boyfriend's phone because I think I have too many pictures on my phone or something. Because it's just totally frozen.
It's
I
all
don't know why.
good. It,
We have the
it's
same
all good.
phone. We got the phone at the same day at the same time. Why
Well,
does mine not work?
you know
That's
what? How about we save that for another call?
yeah,
The
of course.
pitfalls of technology and live Instagram feeds.
Okay.
So, anyway, hi, nice to
Sorry,
see
Jane.
you. Hi, hi,
Nice to
hi.
meet you. Oh.
I I was ready to hoof it alone, and I was like literally sweating, but it's all good. You saved the day. So first of all, I wanted to. I guess it's great that the delay was happening because we have the viewers are still joining and logging in. Um, the purpose of this call, in working with Makers Row, which is such a great source of opportunity for startups and independent and emerging designers, is that in all the years that we've been working with them, we've found that there's this lack of preparedness when people come to the table, right? So whether they're well funded or they just have an idea at the time, they don't really know what it takes to make it happen, right? And so before we go into the preparation and how to properly prepare, I wanted to just do a quick catch up with you. I know we have a lot to unpack on our call, but just everybody, the history lesson here. Ginny and I worked together at Tommy Hilfiger Company in the early 90s. It was really the heyday of the company. It was a very exciting time to be part of such an incredible growth explosion in my career. Was the genesis of my career, basically, after a little pit stop at J. Crew. But why I think it's important to have you here today is to really reflect for a moment on that as a startup, right? Because that is the definition of startup fashion, being part of a huge multi-million, 100 plus, 500 plus $1 million company at the time to start up a new division, right? So we started Tommy Women's Wear, which didn't exist. We started the jeans line, which didn't exist. And so that was where my entrepreneurial juices kind of started, right? And being part of this crazy cycle of start and stop and start and stop, and is it right? And talk us through that and how being part of that as a startup element affected you and then created your entrepreneurial spirit to go off and do your own thing.
Well, it was definitely a lot different back then, and we were part of a huge company that was well funded, and they already had started Tommy Hilfiger Men's. So in starting Tommy Hilfiger Women's, we were trying to figure out who is Tommy's woman. So there were a lot of hills and valleys that we went through, trying to find the perfect match to say, is it going to be the same fabrics? Is it going to be the same like DNA? And then what we did was recreated the DNA for women using fabrics that were more stretch and fits that were more fitted, and but then also figuring out what women's fashion for Tommy meant as well. So that was challenging. There are a lot of chefs there. That's the one thing about a huge company, is there are a lot of chefs. So it's not like you make the decision and like it's done,
Correct.
Some other person might not like it, some other person might like this, some other person might like that. And then we started Tommy Jeans, which was great because Tommy Men's was doing really well at the time, and Tommy Hilfiger really just needed to cater to that younger man that wasn't as the college guy, or wasn't the college graduate, or the young guy in his 30s. It was the guy who's in his teens. So that was really good fun, is taking the denim and then adding all the sport element to it, with the windbreakers and the rugbies and the soccer jerseys and the football rugbies and making the jeans bigger and looser. And yeah.
So basically, you know, the takeaway from that, which I mean, we could talk for hours about those years and all of the ups and downs, and like you said, the hills and valleys. But I think the takeaway is that, you know, a startup that is well funded, that is well staffed, that has the operational structure is really the recipe for success. And so, you know, being part of that startup energy, you know, I reflected on thinking even back to, you know, I think we launched in fall 95 was the first season, or 96. I'm getting my years mixed up. But I remember sitting in the adoption room and, you know, our president at the time turning to all of us saying, you know, 3 days before Thanksgiving, cancel your weekend. We're getting on a plane Saturday night to go to Hong Kong and fix this shit. Pardon my French. And so, you know, we got up, we left, we went, landed Monday, went straight to work, fixed it by Wednesday, back on a plane, came home and had samples ready in our hands. So, you know, it's such an interesting, you know, energy that, listen, we were able to do that because the financing was there, because the budget was there, because the structure was there. So I want to talk a little bit about the topic for today and why we titled it, you know, preventing a DIY, right? A do-it-yourself from becoming a DIY. Like, why did I do that? And it was really more of like a whiny title, because I think technically speaking, a lot of people that come into this, whether they're knocking on my door or they're knocking on someone else's door trying to figure it all out, they think they can do it on their own. And I think that's a general misnomer. And you know, I want to dive in on that topic with you. You know, the topic I want to embark on now is perfectly baked versus reality. And I say that for a couple of reasons. You know, I start off by saying, you know, what's the easiest way to explain to people really what it's like on this side of the fence, right? And, you know, Irma Bombeck, the grass is always greener. That's always a great, you know, image. But fashion is not as easy as people think it is. And, you know, I use IKEA as an example. There's no store that you go into in fashion where you can buy a box and unpack the box and get back to your house and spend 3 to 4 to 5 hours putting a damn shelf together that you hope comes together, because you might have missed section 18 or 19 and you're already at section 30 and you missed one of the pegs. Or, you know, HelloFresh. The food comes perfectly chopped up for you, and then all you have to do is saute it or put it in a roasting pan. Or Betty Crocker, the easy bake oven, perfectly baked, doesn't exist in fashion. It doesn't exist in startup fashion in particular. And so I wanted to kind of hone in on that, you know, what the common misperceptions are that people have when setting out to launch a brand. So did you want to speak on that a little bit, and from your own personal experience of launching your own line?
Oh, definitely. I think that, you know, it's definitely a misconception if someone thinks that they're going to buy, like, you know, a designer t-shirt and bring it to a factory and say, I want you to take this t-shirt fit and make it with this type of v-neck, because I'm looking for that kind of v-neck and I can't find it. That's what I want. And, you know, make up some hang tags and labels, and all of a sudden you throw it up online and you have a business that's successful.
Right.
That's definitely a dream that doesn't really happen. There's a lot more involved than that. And I think that that's kind of what some people think. And that's kind of like a 1 in a million kind of thing. And that would be like pure luck, like almost like winning the lottery. So you really, really need an expert in the fashion field to help you navigate the way if you're starting your own brand. Because there's so much more involved than, you know, just bringing a factory sample and saying, you know, I'm going to just make this my business.
Well, you're segueing into something which is my next topic, which is perfect, which is know what you don't know. And I think that phrase is really important to remember when whoever's watching today, eventually, who walks in to start up and leverage their finance and start to put pen to paper to make it happen, you have to know what you don't know. I admittedly don't do my own taxes. I hire a professional, a very high priced professional to do my taxes because I know that I don't know how to do that, right? And so I say it obviously with a sense of humor, but it's true. I think most people think that they've got to own all the processes and they have to be part of it. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful, you know? And so I think one of the questions is, you know, how do you prepare yourself for launching the line or launching your brand, you know, mentally and fiscally, right? So what do you have to come to the table with? What do you have to have in your pocket? And what do you have to have upstairs besides the knowledge that I don't know everything and I can't handle this and all the facilitation of this process? So talk me through
definitely.
it.
Well, I actually am a perfect example because I did work for Tommy Hilfiger for many, many years. And I worked my way up the ladder. Granted, I was like an assistant for 5 years before I became a designer. And then worked my way up to an EVP. But when I did leave Tommy and I had this dream of having my own fashion line, I wanted to make all those things that I always wanted that I couldn't find out of expensive fabrics and perfect silhouettes. And so I started going to the garment center in between 7th and 8th and 36th and 39th Street where all the factories are, and made up some samples. And, you know, I was introduced to a buyer at Bergdorf and they picked me up and put me next to Expo and Piazza Sempione, which was a shock. You know, I didn't even expect that. I was just kind of like, oh, wow, I really want a linen suit.
Right.
Or, oh, wow, I really want this leather coat. Or, you know, this is like certain staples I've always wanted for my wardrobe. I never can find them. And then all of a sudden it turned into a business. And, you know, little did I know that, you know, I was doing the business model the wrong way. I was spending way too much money on pattern making with pattern makers in the garment center who weren't, some of them, the best pattern makers. And you would go through a fitting and you would pay the fit model. Sometimes the factory person that owned the factory would charge for their time as well. They'd make all these changes and then they would say, okay, well, we have to make a new dress, and preferably in the fabric that you're going to produce it in, because fabrics react differently than others.
Yep. Yep.
With the same lining you're going to produce it in. So there you go. There's your $100 wool and, you know, $60 silk.
Plus the shipping fees from Europe and the duties and the taxes.
And then we're going to pay the fit model $195 an hour to refit the dress.
Right.
Okay. I was like naive, you know, nice and sweet, and just wanted to make the perfect fitting dress. Okay. So I go back there and they actually made it worse. Like,
you know,
the
so
were actually taking me back 5. So then we had to do it again and again and again. And that was for one dress. So one dress cost me over $1,000 just to make the pattern.
So let me respond to that,
I
because
say you then, Jamie, because you would have never put up with what I put up ever.
I guarantee you that you're correct on that. But I think you you brought up a really important point, because the perfectly baked versus reality, yes, there's going to be deviations in things. Development is an absolute nightmare process. We know that. Whether you're using a fit model, whether you're a proper tech designer or a proper, you know, design director who has color and shape, experience, I think you have to understand that everything that we're doing is engineering. And so you're building a recipe for something that takes the time. So whether or not you are in the hands of the best supplier for you is to be determined, because generally speaking, why we spend so much time at Fabric to Finish to vet our vendors and our partners is to know what they're really great at. Whereas people starting off in this DIY, they call up a friend and say, I need a factory, I need a pattern maker. And they just knock on door to door in the garment district, kind of like what you did. And you stumble upon someone that's happy to work with you. It doesn't, it's not like that in the real world. And you learn the hard way, and you overspent, and we know that. And so
I had grabbed my bag of samples and my roll of fabric and my slopers from one factory to another until I finally, you know, after I wasted so much money, you know, found a few factories that actually were good.
Right.
I lost so much money in the first 2 years of just trying to find the right factory. And then in honest, you know, honest factories too, who actually aren't going to take advantage of you and aren't going to charge you for their time to make a pattern that is still correct.
Correct.
No.
Right. So nobody was advocating for you, and I think that that's part of
I was doing it alone.
Correct. So you didn't have operations. You didn't have someone that was a business partner or someone to really drive through process, procedure, protocol, standard operating procedure. I mean, you have to go in. The expectation is, you know, and I say this, listen, I've been in the industry now 30 years, and it does come down to policing, right? You can have a great relationship, but they're real estate agents in my book. And I say that to everybody that starts off. You know, these individuals, a lot of them are family run businesses domestically, and offshore, same thing. I have relationships that span almost the 30 years of my career. But you're still in a relationship with them where they're supplying and you're purchasing. And so there's accountability there. There's technical specifications that have to be met. I always say we're the police officers, because designers will go in and they don't understand from a logistics standpoint, you know, how to have these tough conversations. You know, if my specs weren't met and you're sending me a sample and the sample costs $350 plus the freight to ship it over here, plus the duties, the taxes, and my time, who's paying for that? Because you didn't follow my armhole construction and my bust dart and how that was all intertwined over here, and my fit is all banged up because you didn't pay attention. So I think that there's a great conversation that comes out of this, which is having the team of people, having an advocate, actually having an operation, right? As a creative person, you know, you are unlike a lot of the other industry people out there and newbies and startups. You've got industry experience, right? And so you've had industry experience, but you still lean towards the creative side. You see color, you see image, you see shape, you see pattern, right? And well,
that's why at the time when I did my line on my own, and I had some people that helped me, they weren't people that were really seasoned in the garment business. They had some finance experience and were lovely. But I really needed like a bulldog. I needed like a business person who had experience, who was actually going to help me find the right factories, negotiate with my factories, and you know, also tell me, no, you can't do 16 garments, or no, you can't do 8. You need to just do 4 good ones.
And knowing what I know about you, I would have said, no, you can't run 40 euro a meter Swiss poplin if you want to make a margin.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, that's a problem too. My fabric.
I know your taste in fabric. Well, so that being said, to segue into the next topic, which is the blood and guts of it, and this is not for the faint of heart. And I always talk about the operating room, and I use my analogies because, again, that's how I think best. When I can envision something, I understand it if I'm not familiar with it. You know, there's a reason why they have a spouse sit in the waiting room while the husband is in the operating room. It's gory, it's bloody. There's, there's no reason for anybody else to be in that room watching it. The professionals are in there, the anesthesiologist is in there, the open heart surgeon is cutting him open safely and in a way that they're supposed to under protocol. And then they come out and say, Jane, your husband did great. We're wheeling him into recovery. We'll let you in there when he's ready. And I say that, and as frustrating as it is, people don't understand because they want to get into this and think if I'm not involved and if I'm not in the room where it happens, then nothing's going to go right. When conversely, when they start to feel like they have to drive the bus and take over for a team of people that know what they're doing, that's when things start to derail. And it's a tough conversation to have. And so it's a matter of, getting into the process, but understanding that if you want to be involved, you have to surrender. You have to understand this is not going to come out looking so great. It's going to be half-baked, trust me. But there's no panic. There's no reason to flip out. I'm not asking the factory to, comp a sample because it's a 1/4 inch off spec. It just didn't execute from 2D to 3D. Now we tweak it. Now we work on the neckline. Now we work on the folds. And so you sample, you develop. But all of the hardships, I think that a lot of the new startup people don't understand is that, well, my idea is foul proof and I have tech packs, so nothing's going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. But everything and anything that can go wrong goes wrong. And you mentioned it earlier in the game, but I think specifically I wanted to highlight that because I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that people face is that they don't understand and they think that they're being wronged and that they're being taken advantage of, but they're not. And so the reality is that, for example, when you're doing your first proto, and if we're on a very tight time and action calendar, and our goal is to get first protos just to see how everything is executing, right? So you'll use substitute trim, substitute zippers, substitute snaps where necessary, right? Well, listen, when it comes down to real samples, you have to use your real trims. And so when you're using real snaps, say on a children's wear brand, which is also an interesting thing to talk about from a safety perspective, you have to make sure that you're doing proper snap testing and checking that things aren't going to pop off and tear fabric and, God forbid, fall into the hands of a toddler or the newborn and have a storyline that I don't even want to talk about. So when you develop, taking the time to develop it in actual trim sometimes costs more money, but you take the guesswork out of the process. And I know that you can speak to that because sometimes on one hand, I just want to see what this is going to look like from my flat sketch to see how it executes in a 3-dimensional body. But on one hand, wow, this is a performance outerwear line, and I really need to do it in actual fabric to test my seam taping and all my hardware and all my waterproof, breathable technology that I'm implementing. So do you have any comments on any of that? Because I think that's also a critical part that people have to understand that comes along with development.
Oh, definitely. I think that it depends what you're making. And when we used to get protos back, or when we would do our first protos at Tommy Hilfiger, we would just tell the factory, just put them in navy or white. Because if you go out to the local market and get like a fabric that's the right hand feel and the right construction and the right content, because that's the quality we're looking for, but it has like little tiny like purple flowers on it or gingham check or something that looks like a tablecloth, and we show Tommy garments in that, he's gonna flip out.
Remember.
Even if we say, oh, don't worry, Tommy, it was just proto fabric, it's just local market, they just had to get that was 96.4 and 160 grams or something.
Right.
I'd rather not have 96.4 and 160 grams. I'd just rather have something white or navy.
It's funny. It's funny. Well, back in the big corporate days when, when you're trying to show something to, a celebrity or the namesake of a globally recognized brand, it's a different energy. In startup fashion, of course, we're there to impress the client, but the client has to also understand that you know what? I have to test the actual fabric, so this might come in fuchsia. So
Yeah,
ignore the color, you know?
yeah, yeah. That's another thing you have to learn is that, you know, your proto might not be in the right color. It might not have the right trim. It might be the right fabric, but it might
Right.
not be the right color, and it might not have the exact trim.
Right.
So there's a lot of visualization that goes on.
Well, that actually begs another phrase that I was raised on back in the day, which is it nice or necessary? Right? And so if it's more important for you to show the collection in actuals with substitute something that's not so relevant. Yes, maybe it's not waterproof zippers and I can just run a regular coil or two-way, whatever, but it would be nice to have it in the real stuff, but it's necessary to show you how it's going to execute, because what happens, as you and I both know, in development is where they're really fabricating the recipe and how it's going to go under the needle and the construction and the sandwiching of the seams and the pleating and the darts and all that stuff. And I think generally speaking, what happens is if it's meant to be just a pretty proto, then we're not getting the job done, because a sample sewer is different than a production line sewer.
Well, also, if something has signature hardware, you might not get that on your first sample. You might get the same quality.
Correct.
But it might not be your logo printed zipper.
Absolutely.
Or barn dyed
Absolutely.
elastic, because
so that
to get those things, you have to buy large volume.
correct.
You know, for a trim factory to make zippers with your name on it, you have to order thousands of pieces.
So there's the nice versus necessary, right? I can use a sub zipper, but I need the construction of my garment to be exactly that which I'm expecting in production, because if you're developing something in one kitchen and then you change it and put it in another kitchen, the recipe is going to be very different, and there are going to be problems on the production sewing lines, which is why I always try to really execute in actuals whenever possible. I want to keep segueing into the last chapter, which is distribution and direct to consumer versus brick and mortar, and DTC as we call it. It's such an interesting conversation. And again, we can save this for another talk because it's so impactful right now, especially in this pandemic economy, where most brands that had an online presence or a direct to consumer presence were the ones that actually potentially won the pandemic, because those that were almost 100% dependent on their retail accessibility were significantly affected, as we all know. I want to talk to you about choices now and why direct to consumer versus retail. Why how much of both? You know, what's a healthy ratio? What are we looking at these days? What are advantages and disadvantages to both, in your opinion?
Well, direct to consumer is like the way to go nowadays. But if your margins are good enough and you have some brick and mortar that are interested in your product, that's great too. The thing with brick and mortar or, you know, selling wholesale is you have to make sure that, you know, you have a margin big enough that when you sell to them, you're still going to make money. Because the chances are the store is going to want to buy it from you at a really low price that they can make it like 2 or 3 times more at retail. So they're making all the money. And unless your margin is good, you're only making a smidgen.
Well, it's interesting because most of our brands almost exclusively are DTC brands, and they've started off that way because they're independent and emerging, and they don't have, you know, the name that would be recognizable yet to a big box store, you know, a Nordstrom, a Neiman's, a Bergdorf. And so ultimately what we find is that if they're going to build their strategy, if they're going to build a strategy, they have to really feel upfront what it's going to look like. Am I going to do strictly DTC or both? Because what happens is we source, we develop, we build based on the end result and use, right? So if someone's looking to launch a herringbone cashmere blazer, for example, then I know what my target price points are for my cost of goods, my base cloth, my labor, essentially, if there's any duties or taxes or freight involved. And so all of a sudden, if they're shifting to, retail, sorry, you I feel like you're having an earthquake over there. Are you good?
Running out of battery.
Say it again?
Since I'm using Max's phone, it wasn't fully charged.
Oh, okay, got it. We didn't want to have
fully charged, it just didn't work.
Oopsie.
Okay.
Anyway, so what we find is that people are changing mid-game, and they're like, no, I've got interest from such and such store in the Midwest, and they want to buy my line. And so we're sitting there scratching our heads like, oh, okay, well, I've got to rebuild this then, right? You built a Bentley, but now you want a Toyota. So I have to go back to the factory. I got to go back to all my parts. I have to change it up a little bit. And so I think it's also something for those who are watching out there today should really hone in on what their ultimate selling and distribution model is. It's very important because you're setting up your blocks, you're setting up your supply chain, right?
Yeah, but that happens a lot. Is people start to get buyers after the fact, and they hadn't actually built their garments to sell to these people at these certain margins. And then they just do it to get exposure and then lose a ton of money.
Understood.
But
well,
then
I guess
process because you have to redo your product.
I know. Going back to the well, it costs money. That's really how it translates. The last topic and the last question that I have for you is, and anyone who's watching out there who's either embarking on or currently in or flipping up and down, figuring out what's next and how do I do this, my question to you, Ginny, is, what could I have done differently, right? And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience on launching your own line and what you could have done differently in the outcome of that story.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think that, like I said, I was just experimenting in the garment center, making some clothes that I liked for myself. And I ended up getting picked up by Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus. So all of a sudden I had to figure out how to keep going. And Bergdorf and Neiman didn't just want a dress and a jacket or one linen suit. They wanted a full collection. And so I started off like without a business plan. I started off making expensive garments and European fabrics in the garment center. So the pattern making was very expensive. Importing fabric from Europe was very expensive. And the fact that I couldn't just give them 3 items per season and order deep into those 3 items, they wanted a buffet. They wanted a full collection, and they wanted to order like 6 jackets, 6 pants, 6 sweaters, 6 blouses, 6 skirts, because they wanted like a nice assortment. But I was making absolutely no money because you don't make money if you're only making 6 pieces.
I know. Well,
and that's
the other thing.
retail.
Yeah, strategizing your merchandising plan.
Yeah. So I would probably, if I did it again, I probably wouldn't launch luxury women's wear with my own money. And I would probably find a business partner that could actually negotiate for me. But definitely I would find a business model that was smarter, and use someone like you so that I could, not get taken advantage of so much.
Operations are the core of any organization, and I modeled fabric to finish off of my life experience in corporate fashion. In any fashion house, you've got a machine, and the machine is, you've got design, you've got tech, you've got trim, you've got fabric. I mean, we had a whole fabric department. I have brands that come in and start their business and think that they've got it all taken care of because they found a fabric vendor. The fabric vendor is selling them stuff. They don't know the weight, the construction, the performance, the color fastness, the shrinkage, the bleeding, the crocking, all that stuff. And so even pH and OEcoTex approved and organic and sustainability. And there's so much operational stuff that goes into building a new collection. And so that's, you know, obviously that was missing. You didn't have a team. You didn't have, you know, you didn't have us, essentially.
Oh, exactly.
You know, I want to entertain a couple questions that came in, and Shay is going to kind of highlight what they are. If you'd be so kind as to share that with us, and then we can answer those.
How much budget do you think is appropriate to start a brand if you're doing it from scratch yourself?
Oof. How much budget do you have to be prepared? How much do you have to have in your pocket to even put one foot in the door of starting, you know, starting a collection?
Well, it depends what you're starting, what kind of collection you're starting, and if you already have a buyer. But you would need like probably $1 million.
Well, not everybody has that in their pocket, just, you know, between you and me and all,
I didn't.
all the viewers.
I mean, definitely to start your own business with your own collection, you're going to burn through a lot, but it depends how expensive your clothes are. But usually, like, if it's not expensive clothes, that you're going to buy higher quality or quantities to get the factory to give them to you. Right?
Well, listen, I think generally speaking, a lot of the startups that are watching this call, they're not collection-based entrepreneurs, they're item-based entrepreneurs. So maybe they're looking to make that perfectly fitting t-shirt, or that perfect boyfriend blazer, or that perfect, you know, thong.
You should probably say what you think it would cost then, because I'm telling you from my women's luxury business experience.
I say a couple $100,000 for sure, but it can be, the fat can be trimmed. You know, I think that if it's done intelligently, if it's done methodically, there's certain unavoidables. The number of fittings, unavoidable, but you can reduce them if you're policing it, right? And there's a way to kind of get things quickly to the finish line. When I say quickly, I use that term very loosely. Efficiently, how about that? Efficiently, with minor bumps and bruises. But I'd be happy to talk budget with anybody on this call that's interested. And they can reach out to us on the Makers Row platform. They can also reach out to us on our Fabric to Finish platform as well. Can I take another question?
What % margin should you be getting in order to even consider brick and mortar?
What percentage should you be getting to even consider brick and mortar? Like 75, 85%. I mean, I don't even, you know, at this point, you know, back in the day, you know, it was so different, right? I remember margin discussions and costing meetings was like 50%, 52.5%. It's very different now.
Yeah, I mean, even back then, Tommy's CEO said at least 60.
Yeah. And in brick and mortar, you're dealing with, depending on the brick and mortar, and if it's a big, you know, or I don't even know who's still in business anymore after the pandemic, but, you know, there's something called chargebacks. There's all these things and penalties that come back to hit you in the you know what, if you're not delivering it in compliance with their warehouse operating manual, if your goods aren't labeled a certain way, if things are shipped one day after the cancel date. You know, it's a high risk proposition. It's great to have your name in these stores, of course, but I think margin.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's also good to have a factor. If you're starting your own business and selling to a lot of different stores, like say, for example, you have a little collection, you know, dresses or, you know, a tight collection that didn't cost too much to produce, and it's fair price, which is doable. But then all of a sudden you get all these boutiques from all over the country that are coming and they wanting to order your dresses. You really need a factor, like, which is like a business company that can vet out who's a good pair and who isn't.
And they'll finance the purchase orders, basically.
Right.
You just have to show proof of paper, right?
Right. So they'll give you the money for the production, and then they'll take the money from the store, and the money comes in and then give you the difference. but they're going to tell you don't work with Tom, Dick, and Harry because they don't pay.
Understood. Understood.
That's something you need to know when you have your own business, a new business.
Absolutely. I wanted to take one more question. I know we've gone over a little bit, but I think that there's some little nibbles that came through that Shay wants to share. What else do we have?
So this is a specific question. What's the best way to pitch to a factory with an accessory line rather than a typical apparel line?
What's the best way to pitch to a factory with accessories? So pitch, I'm not sure I understand pitch, but meaning still it's the same process. We're working in bags and accessories. It's still something that has to be built. So there has to be an architectural plan. There has to be flat sketches, CAD designs, detailed specs, points of measure sheets, where you might not be grading, you know, having, you know, SML, XL. I think that in accessories, you still have to handle it like it's a one size fits all. So the tech pack is still going to be the high level of technical detail and engineering. The more detail that you have on your tech pack, the more specifics, the more highlights, the more thumbnails, the more examples that you give to a vendor, the closer to being right your sample and prototype process will be. So my
Accessory factory.
understood, but I think the question was, how do you pitch accessory versus apparel? And it's generally the same, but obviously to the right vendor, right? I'm not going to be making a leather bag in a sportswear factory, right?
Or you're going to make a leather bag in the type of factory that makes nylon backpacks.
Correct. And there's different, then that's what having a proper sourcing arm and a proper production company is all about, to be able to navigate through that stuff, you know? And I think a lot of people, the misnomer is, hey, I know a guy that has a factory, you know? So not everyone is great at everything. Denim factories don't make sweaters. Sweater factories don't make outerwear jackets. They don't make shoes. They don't do sleepwear. They don't do children's wear. There's certifications, there's compliance, there's so many facets that people don't know when they are embarking on this, which is why the DIY is something that you should reconsider before you go off on this alone. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, we can start to wrap up and look forward to maybe meeting again. Any other questions? I think we're all good. I had such a great time doing this. I love that it is with one of my oldest and dearest friends. And I really love that you shared the little ins and outs of your experiences in starting your own business and giving people a real truthful view at really what it takes. And I think that the conversation always continues. We're always here to answer everybody's questions. I'm gonna end the live now. I'm gonna say goodbye and thank you to Ginny.
Thank you, guys. And guess what? My new brand is the Messy brand.
Oh, yes.
.com. Leo Messy.
Say it one more time. Say it slower.
TheMessyStore.com.
Do you want to just give a little debrief on the brand and
It's
who it's for?
Lifestyle brand for the famous soccer player.
Absolutely. And
where created it?
Where is it being sold?
TheMessyStore.com.
Okay, just wanted to hear you say it one more time.
Thanks, Jay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. This was great fun. And I look forward to doing this again. If there's interest, we're happy to come back and create another storyline for everybody to continue the journey of how to properly prepare for your brand launch and how to get from fabric to finish. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right. I just want to save to my camera roll and I don't know how, so come and show me. It's an X. So do I hit X? If I X, I'm going to lose it, right?
Oh. Yeah, I think, do you end it that way?